Welcome in to another new podcast from the Association for Materials Protection and Performance. As always, I'm your host, Ben DuBose, news editor with the AMP publications team. In that capacity, I write and create content for both CoatingsPro Magazine and Materials Performance Magazine, which are both member magazines of AMP. Today's podcast is going to be a little bit different in that we're celebrating the life and legacy of Malcolm McNeil. For anyone who doesn't know, Malcolm was the owner and president of McNeil Coatings Consultants, and he was an absolute legend in this industry for many decades. He sadly passed away on August 31st of this year. He was 92 years old at the time and is survived by his son, Richard McNeil. Malcolm had been an industry mainstay since his first jobs back at Sherwin-Williams and Glidden Paint Company back in the 1950s and 60s. As the years progressed, he broadened his scope by starting his own consulting business, and he also became a lead instructor and chairman for NACE International's flagship Coating Inspector Program, or CIP. That CIP program is now operated by AMP after the 2021 merger of the two legacy organizations, NACE International and SSPC, the Society for Protective Coatings. Overall, Malcolm spent more than 6 decades as a professional in the coatings business. His experience included roles in sales and sales management, training, consulting, specification writing, coatings failure analysis, as well as roles as an expert witness and in coatings inspection. And for 14 years, he served as technical editor for CoatingsPro Magazine. We've actually got memorial articles with quotes and perspectives on Malcolm's life in both the November print issue of CoatingsPro as well as in digital form on our website at coatingspromag.com. But we figured this podcast would be a good way to potentially dive a little bit deeper into Malcolm's life and provide some more color as it pertains to his very memorable and impactful decades in the industry. So to talk about that and to really dive into the impact that Malcolm made on this industry and the markets we serve, I've got 2 people with me today who know him very well. One is Phil Fouche, the owner and president of oilfield equipment supplier Rexco in Odessa, Texas. Phil has been a member of NACE and now AMP since 1991. And during those years, Phil was active and is active on numerous association boards and committees, including a spot on the CIP subcommittee for over a decade. On the business side, Phil sold heavy-duty coatings until the sale of his paint stores in 2016. Phil and Malcolm traveled the world together teaching CIP for quite some time, and so we're definitely going to let Phil tell some of those stories today. We've had Phil on the podcast before, as some of our longtime listeners may recall, so I'm happy to welcome him back. And I'm also excited to welcome back Stephanie Chizik. Stephanie is now AMP's Senior Manager for Conference Program Development, but for many years before that, she was the lead editor of CoatingsPro, where she worked closely with Malcolm all those years and got to know him really well. So, Phil and Stephanie, thanks so much for joining me today. I want to start by letting each of you give some background on how you got to know Malcolm and what initially stood out to you about him. Phil, we can start with you.
Okay, thanks, man. I appreciate it. Stephanie, good to see you and talk to you. Malcolm loved you dearly, by the way.
Thank you for saying that.
Yeah, he was, we'll talk about it. He was sure an amazing person. I'll say at the beginning, the last thing I'll say, he was never old. He was just never old. You know, I taught my first class in New Orleans with a guy named Dick McGowan. And Dick McGowan and Malcolm were really close friends. I'd never heard of him. I'd never heard of Malcolm. Of course, I teach him my first class. And Dick says, hey, and what's interesting about Dick, Stephanie, I bet you don't even know this. Have you ever seen the crest of the CIP? If you get anything with CIP as CIP 1 or 2, there's a crest in there, and Dick designed the crest. And anyway, unfortunately, he passed away, and he was 60 years old. We had taught a class in Midland together, and like 3 days later, I got a call from his wife, and he had passed away. And it was the first time I ever heard about Malcolm. And he said, do you know this Malcolm? He calls me, he sends me all this funny stuff. I said, no, I don't. And then we had a conference, and I met him, and really, I could tell, just really neat guy and great personality. Everybody loved him, was around him. And then, of course, the big phone call. And I think it was, we taught in October of 2002, the first course in China. And I think that Helena Alexander then, Helena Seelinger now, she called me and said, how would you like to teach the first class in China? I said, man, my bags are packed. She said, well, you're going to go with Malcolm McNeil. And I said, well, I've never taught with him. And we hadn't. We'd known each other for a couple of years. And I was already a lead instructor, and of course he was already lead. I think he was a year or two ahead of me as far as teaching. So anyway, we met in the San Francisco airport. Kind of funny. My wife says, "I want to go," and I said, "Man, I have no idea what it's like. I don't know. I don't know where we're going to stay. I don't know what's going to, if it's going to be safe or not safe." And it's been a really funny story since then. Of course, you know, I'm married and I lost that battle, and she was with us, and we flew to Shanghai to San Francisco, and got off the plane. No one there to meet us, and of course, the long story is, nothing was translated. It was an interesting week. We were actually teaching international paint, and they had a 3-day class then. And for about a year and a half, we taught the 3-day classes over there, just to international. And then in about 2 years later, we started teaching the the full 5-day, it was 5-day class. But anyway, I never will forget. We went to the hotel. We called a taxi. We had a card and got to the taxi. And of course, we didn't have any idea where we were going. And, Shanghai then was, I think, it's still, I think, the largest city in the world. It was second then or something. And it was just, my head was hanging out the window. We just couldn't get enough of it. And so we had a day off, and then we went and set our classroom up. And then the following Monday, we had 27 students showed up. And thank goodness one of them that spoke really good English. It's amazing. And I always say this truthfully, any place I go, the Chinese speak better English than we do. Most of them, of course, 2002, a little different then, but since I've been teaching over there, they do speak good English. We have one guy in there was speaking very, very good and helped us out a lot with the classes. Instead of being over at 5:30, they were at 10:30 at night. But what's funny on this whole thing, every night my wife, they had got her a translator and 2 other women. They just took her all over town, and she'd come in the evening and she'd bring all the things she had bought. And we were sitting at the bar, and Cindy would get out this stuff, and he said, "Ooh, that's nice." And every night she'd bring something different in, and his face got bigger and bigger. And finally, I said, "Hey, we have a day off between this class and the next class. You want to go shopping?" He kind of looked at us and said, "Did you bring any money to shop?" No. And I said, "Okay." So I gave him 5 $100 bills. He did pay me back. I told his son he didn't, but he wouldn't give me the money. So that's a joke. Um, anyway, we went shopping, and he and my wife became shopping buddies. I've never seen anything like it. Matter of fact, I have a picture of them, and they had so many bags in their hands. They had to take a separate taxi back to the hotel, and I had to take one by myself. So there you go. So that's the first time I met him. And truthfully, we taught one other class together in the United States, but all of our teaching was in China together, and we just became just fast, long friends. And I will tell you, he was, I never knew anybody didn't like him. I mean, not only not even like him, everybody I knew loved him. And Stephanie will attest to that, and Ben also. But he was just one of those guys, just had that personality and just so kind and nice, extremely intelligent. And I've got a lot of stories, Stephanie. I'll let you give your little intro.
Yeah, and Stephanie, you go back a few more years than I do. I joined then NACE, now AMP, in 2016, but it was midway through the year. So my first time to see Malcolm was at the 2017 annual in New Orleans. And all I knew about him was that at that point he was in his 80s. So I respected his knowledge, but there's a certain expectation for people of that demographic. And he did not meet that expectation. I mean, he had more life than any of us on the dance floor, and I was sort of blown away. But Stephanie, you knew him a few years before that. Obviously, you brought him on as the technical editor. So what stood out to you when you met him? Why did you bring him on? Just speak to, your process over the last 15 years or so of getting to know him.
I actually did not even bring him on. Elena Lizaraga was the one, at least that I know of, who connected with him and brought him on to CoatingsPro. So he was on the CoatingsPro technical editor position from the moment I started the job. So I joined in 2013 and spent about 11 years, 12 years with him as the technical editor. So yeah, we we just met through email initially. He was always the person on the other end of the of the telegram, when I was asking for advice for any of the articles, and always an amazing teacher and willing to kind of spell things out and explain, and he's really patient with all of that. So I don't remember when I first met him in person, but it was definitely at a NACE event one of those years back then. We eventually started to do the CoatingsPro Contractor Awards, and he just was always willing to help out where he could. So he would always say to me, tell me where you need me. I'll be there. I'll be wherever you need me. So he was always, yes, the friendliest, the most welcoming. He just was the best when it comes to, being where he can and supporting the industry, supporting the people he worked with. So, and yes, to your point, Ben, always one of the first on the dance floor, which is always really great. So
Yeah, she did love to dance.
Well, the reason I thought you brought him on was that in the podcast we did with Malcolm about 3 years ago that we brought back in our digital tribute to him at CoatingsProMag.com, Malcolm actually said that you invited him. Now, I think Malcolm probably got a little bit confused, and that's completely understandable because Malcolm has had a ridiculously busy life. So we'll give him a pass on that. But I think Malcolm actually said that Stephanie, you brought him on. And so I think that's where the origin came from. But regardless of how it started, obviously you got to know him very well over the years. And that role is so important to the magazine because, the case studies, things could fall apart very quickly if there wasn't that level of quality assurance to make sure that, narratives from people like me and you that are coming at it from more of a media perspective and don't have the coatings application background are actually meshing with what's going on in the field and the technologies and the standards and, everything that these professionals are actually doing when they complete a job. So that role is so important. And one thing that stood out to me about Malcolm was that he had the right temperament for it. I'm sure it can be frustrating for some people in those roles to look at, editorial and staff and say, wow, why don't they know what so-and-so is? Why don't they get it? But he was always very measured. He did it with a smile.
Did you ever see him frustrated?
no, never saw him frustrated.
That's exactly what Ben was saying.
Yeah.
And so many times I've been with him, I never did. I never saw him frustrated. Never really. I saw him upset a couple times, but it was just such minor compared to everybody else. I could hear his laugh right now. And I think about him, and he just never. He just did his job, and he would call me, and I said, "Where are you?" He said, "I'm on the 12th floor of the Indiana Capitol." I said, "Inside or outside?" And he said, "Oh, I'm outside." He said, they've got some scaffolding up. I said, "Malcolm, this is 2 years ago." He actually called me, let's see, he passed away and all. He called me where we're at a conference. And then right after he called me, he said, "I've got to go to a building." And he was on the 4th floor outside on the scaffolding. He climbed up there. And we all was concerned about him, but I finally told all his friends and my friends too, just leave him alone. He'll be happy. If he falls and dies, he'll be happy dying. I mean, that's what he liked to do.
The only time I think I ever saw him slightly off kilter, I would say, is he invited me and another one of my coworkers to lunch at conference one year. And so we went with him to this food court, and I wouldn't let him pay. And he got so annoyed with me. Because I kind of snuck my credit card because the company's credit card. I wanted to treat him on behalf of CoatingsPro Magazine, and he was like, "I invited you. I wanted to pay." Well, we won't have that here, so thank you for offering.
I'll tell you something. Go ahead. Yeah.
Oh, I was just going to say, like, one of the defining characteristics of Malcolm, it was never about him. Like, even the last couple of years of his life, when there was some decline, he kept working. And so whenever you spend 50, 60 years in the industry, like, you're going to accomplish a lot. And he certainly did as a professional, but he went the extra mile with obviously the CIP program, with being the technical editor of CoatingsPro. Like, why did he It sounds harsh when I say, why did he care that much? Because honestly, like, this is a really valuable industry. We all should care, but it's easier said than done. Like, he truly did go the extra mile. He truly did care that much. Where do you all think that came from?
Well, this was his, you and I talked about this, man. This was his away place. This was his happy place. And that's all I'll say, but he these are his people, and this what made him happy. And bless his heart, he lost his middle child, who's a son. He lost him in '05. Then he lost his daughter 2 years ago, and he lost his granddaughter, his great-granddaughter. And he had the one son left who I got to meet at the funeral. But, truthfully, it was his happy place, and it was a tough old deal. And he actually expressed that to me. And, he loved his family, but it was very testing. And he had it's just some heartbreaks in there. But he was always happy. When we talked, we went to conference when he was involved in NACE AMP, he was always happy. I never saw him any other way. And that's what really made me. And I'll tell you kind of a funny story, what started it all. When we were in China, he started buying all this stuff. And I said, you guys should get another suitcase. And so we went and bought another suitcase for all this stuff he was buying. So we were eating a very interesting place down on the Bund, B-U-N-D, which means muddy riverbank, which separates Shanghai. And we were eating in a really nice place. And so Cindy and I are sitting there eating, and he gets up, and then he comes back and says, you got to come see this. I said, see what? He said, I'm going to buy this. I said, what is it? Come on, let's go look at it. We walk around there, and there's a jade ship. And it was probably 3 foot long, 3 foot tall. It's probably 2.5 foot long, 2.5 foot tall. Probably 300 pieces of jade, made the sails and all that kind of stuff. I said, Malcolm, how are you going to get that home? I'll figure it out. And I said, no. We finally talked him out of buying it. So he went the next day and bought a Buddha. And his wife wouldn't let him bring it in the house. Well, he laughed out. He said, I don't think she's going to let me bring it in. And I asked his son at the funeral. He said, no. He said, one of the son-in-laws has the Buddha. She wouldn't let him bring it in the house. That's what he said.
That is funny. I will say, in reaction to your comment about his home life, I remember he shared a little bit about that with me over the years. But one of the things that always struck me about Malcolm was he was extremely present, and he wanted to be, I think, supportive and active in where he currently was. But he also was always really happy to go home and see his wife. So it felt like
about it. She was struggling with her health, and he was there, and he took care of her to the very end. She died on April 25th, and he died on August 31st?
31st.
Yeah, and so he was there with her when she passed away, and he called us, and I said, you want me to come up here? He said, no, but I don't want to leap ahead. But it was really interesting conference this year. He was different to me. And what I did, and I look back now, and he was really saying goodbye to me. And he said, let's just me and you go to lunch. And I'm going to buy. And I said, what? You never buy lunch. I always buy lunch. He said, oh, hush, let's go eat. I said, okay. So just he and I went over there, and we're sitting there. I thought, he's about to tell me something. And he looked at me and he said, I want you to do my eulogy. Nobody knows me better than you do.
Oh.
He said, include my family. He said, you just know everything about me, and I want you to do my eulogy. I said, you're not ever going to die. What we didn't know was that when he was 87 or 88, he called me and said he had prostate cancer, but the doctor said he'd never die of it. Well, what had happened, and he knew it when he told me. He wouldn't tell me. The son told me at the end that he didn't want to tell me, but that the prostate cancer had spread to his lungs, and that was what ended up doing it. It ended up taking him away. But it was those kind of things that you just, anyway, he said, promise you'll do my eulogy. And I said, Malcolm, I will. Then his wife passed away on April 25th, and he called me 3 days later. He said, now you remember what you're going to do. You're going to do my eulogy. So I knew then, I told Cindy, I said, something's going on we don't know. So I asked him, I said, you okay? Oh, I'm feel fine. Well, he didn't. And next thing I know, his son calls me, and he's in the hospital. I talked to him on Sunday night, Monday night, and Tuesday night. And then on Wednesday, he was unconscious, and then he died that weekend. But the last thing he says, "I love you."
Oh,
And I said, "I love you." And he says, "Tell everybody I love them." And he said,
Oh.
"Best part of my life has always been NACE and AMP and the people I've taught with and my students." And he said, "I loved every minute of being on." He said, "I love being on the." Oh, he always talked about coatings being on the technical deal. He loved it. Anyway, I cannot tell you how much he loved doing that. He really did. It was
that's
just,
great.
yeah. Ben looks like he wants to say something.
Well, I want to spin it forward to discussing his legacy and what he meant to
Right.
the industry and to the association. And for me, I'll start. I did not know him as well as you two did, but he had a really unique spot as someone that clearly had a ridiculous amount of experience and technical knowledge, yet had the personality to where he could share it with a mass audience without getting frustrated. And Stephanie, I know your roles for all those years at CoatingsPro and now with our conferences team. There's lots of people that have the experience and the technical knowledge, but not all of them have the willingness, the personality to, be so accessible to the masses. Like
You
Malcolm
hit the
had
nail on the head, Ben. That's his success right there. His personality went with his knowledge so well.
yeah. And Stephanie, how important was that to you? And honestly, both your current role and more so what you did at CoatingsPro, having someone that can sort of combine both the intellect and the knowledge with the personality. Like to me, that's what made Malcolm McNeil and made all of this come together.
Yeah, what's interesting about the magazine is that I think he had a lot of impact. Oh, I'm gonna get emotional. He had a lot of impact on people's lives who didn't know it, because he affected every piece of content that was in the magazine. So everything that he touched and made better, they got to, absorb that, whether they knew it or not. I think that to me is such a he wasn't looking for the glory. He just was looking to help the industry. On the the instructor side, I think is when he made that sort of and Phil, you probably way more about this than I do since I was never on the CIP side, but I feel like he probably had a lot more of that one-to-one contact where people knew that he was making an impact. So he got to have both the immediate impact as well as, the when you do something with a written word, you have it's like, times 10 or whatever you want to call it. So I think his impact really has made it's just affected the industry, whether people know it or not, whether they met Malcolm or not, they were impacted by him if they're a part of this industry.
Absolutely. I'm a better instructor because of him. And more than anything else is just like Ben was talking about, just his attitude towards everything. And, you can't get frustrated. You can. You shouldn't get frustrated. You should be able to control yourself. And I watched how he did it and in his kindness and how he dealt with the students. And it's interesting. I met some people along the way that were not involved in NACE, but they were involved. They knew him through his paint sales, and everybody loved him. It wasn't any different with that group of people than is what we're talking about right now. Everybody loved the guy, and I'll tell you a funny story. I got a lot of funny stories, but I think the last time, well, I get a call. I think it was like 2010, and it was July 4th. Pam Nicoletti called me and said, "I need a favor." And all my kids are just we had nine kids, and all their kids went home, and I was worn out. And she said, "Malcolm's in the hospital in Shanghai." I said, "Oh my gosh." She said, "He's okay, but he's flying home. Can you go over and take his place?" So I said, "No, nobody can take his place, Pam. I'll go over there and take his place." And we laugh about that still today. But anyway, I went over there, and so that was, I think, the last time he taught over there. Okay, 2010. Okay, 2010. So I think I'm the last American who went over into Shanghai and taught, and I went over there in December 31st of 2019. Remember, COVID was just about to hit, and we checked in the hotel. And what Cindy and Malcolm and I would always do after flying on the airplane, and we usually could door to door is 24 to 27 hours. We would go across the street and get a foot massage. And so I had, and we landed in New Year's. And then I actually landed in Beijing, and then I took a train down. to Shanghai, and I started teaching. I think that's right. The second 2 weeks of January in 2020. I walked across the street. This is 10 years later. And the girl said, "Oh, you're Dong Ping's friend, Dongping." I said, "Yes, I am." Dong Ping is his Chinese name, as y'all probably have seen that written everywhere. And I thought, 10 years later,
Wow.
here's this American from Indianapolis, Indiana, and said, who's at that time, I guess he was 88 or 89, "You're Dong Ping's friend." I said, "Yes, I am." "Well, sure, tell him I said hello." I went, "Holy moly, you got to be kidding me." And I will tell you, this is another interesting. Malcolm was still teaching, but he was getting confused, and we knew it. And so Pam called me one day and said, "I need some help." I said, "Okay, what's the deal? What's wrong?" She said, "Malcolm needs to get out of the classroom." Said his memory's not like it was, and he had told me that. He said, "I wonder when they're going to bump me out of there." And I said, "Well, let me ask you." I said, Can we use him as a peer?" She said, "Oh, that's a great idea." I said, "Okay, let me call and talk to him." So the next day I called him. I said, "Hey man, how you doing?" "All good." We're yep. And I said, "When did you teach?" And he said, "Well, I taught 3 weeks ago and it just didn't go good." I said, I told you one time, I want you to tell me when I'm not doing a good job." And I said, "I'm not telling you you're doing a good job, but if your memory fails you this time." He said, "I'm sure glad you called." I said, "How would you like to be a peer?" And we always kid the peers. If you can't teach, you become a peer. They won't like that. That's okay. They'll get over it. And God, I would love to. I just want to stay connected. He just want to stay connected. I want to be part of it. And it's, "Malcolm, you'll always be part of it." So I called Pam back. I said, "I think we got a deal. You need to call him right now." So that's how it happened. And that wasn't, but gosh, 2 years ago, he was teaching. We had a little party for him at a conference when he was 90, and he had just taught a class. So, I mean, I'm thinking, can I do that at 90? Golly. Nobody could drink a beer as slow as he could. We always laughed at,
I remember that.
no, it was just, we always teased him about it. It didn't ever bother him, but he was, and I will say it again, he was never old. He was never old.
Yes.
He was sick, but he was never old.
Well, when we close out, I want to let Phil discuss the eulogy and how he would sum up Malcolm's life. But before we get there, do either of you have any other Malcolm stories that we haven't shared that you think would be fun for our audience?
Yeah, I've got some I can't share. No, Malcolm, he was a good person inside out. Very strong Christian, a Methodist. Well, I'm a Methodist, and we always talked about church and Christ and God. And he knew he was going to a better place. But I think the big thing with him is that he just he interacted with the people so well. They became part of him. He became part of them, and it was just this. That's the way he was just that way. And I tell you, I got up this morning thinking about this podcast this morning, thinking he's not here. It's just, I've got kinfolks, and I think about Malcolm's not here. He's always been there, and I just can't imagine how his family's feeling. But he has one son left, and a bunch of little grandkids. They have a bunch of pictures of them, everything. But no, I will tell you what, wherever he went, he had a good time. He enjoyed life, and I think that's the important thing to the
And
very end.
I will miss his e-cards that he would send for every holiday, big or little. I would always get basically a thinking of you on St. Patrick's Day, on Valentine's Day, every single holiday. He'd always send something through the
And I never skipped to the end, Stephanie. Did you? I wanted to see it all.
Did skip to the end, but I wish I hadn't now.
Well, you're honest and fessed up. I might have skipped a couple of times, but it was always that was. It's amazing how many people. It's interesting you say that. Amazing how many people said same thing. "I'll miss his cards." And I went, "Oh yeah, man. He'd send Cindy one, me one. We get them for our birthday or wherever. He was just him. It's
Very
just him.
thoughtful.
Yeah.
It really is.
Yeah.
Well, as a plug to our podcast program, we'll put in the summary the episode that we had with Malcolm from late in 22. But what really stood out to me about it, and I think it speaks to Malcolm's personality, it actually took a little bit of prodding on my part to get it to, we need each episode to at least be 15, 20 minutes. But Malcolm didn't want to talk a ton about himself. Now, I eventually got into, and we got into more of the nitty gritty regarding his career, all the jobs he had, and what led to, his evolution over the years, becoming very involved in the CIP side, and obviously he's technical editor of CoatingsPro. So rather than get into that today, we'll put that episode in the summary and you can listen to it. But I thought it also spoke to Malcolm's personality and that he didn't want to talk about himself too much. He was more excited to talk and do things for other people and talk about other people because, again, he was really trying to make the industry and honestly the world a better place. And so, Phil, I'll let you close us out there. A couple of months ago, you had the honor of delivering the eulogy amongst his family and friends.
Yeah.
How did you sum up Malcolm?
Cindy did part of it, and I did part of it. She wore the Chinese females wear a blouse. It's very colorful, red, all the kind of designs called qipao. And Malcolm and her, I don't know if I can get through this. Malcolm, he was with her when she bought it. And she said, she told, there were about 45 people there, and Jerry Marley, who's an instructor, and his wife drove up. And it was just about 45, one many people. He's outlived everybody except for his family. And all his close friends, except for ones that were involved with him in NACE, but she wore the qipao, and she told the story about buying it when she said, I want to wear it today in honor of him. But the thing that that I said, nobody has had a life like him, and I don't think there's any doubt about that, and I think the family knew it. And my eulogy is just how kind he was with people, how people loved him. And then I talked to a couple of the great grandkids, and they talked about how much they loved him and missed him, and it was just it's pretty. And I can talk, but I kept it pretty short. And the most important thing I said again, I said he was never old. He died because of the sickness, and he never was old. He never acted like it. I mean, I would take him around friends that they didn't know, and they just love him after. What's that friend's name of yours? I got to tell you one last little story though. This is one of my favorite stories because he loved it. He loved it more than we did. Terry Greenfield and I were teaching the first long course to Jotun, the paint company over there, and Malcolm had, I guess it was either Pam or Helena, one of them had asked him to go teach in South Africa with Malcolm Weimer. Well, we called him Malcolm Sr. and Malcolm Jr. Malcolm Jr. is a year older than me. He used to work for me, and great guy. He retired a couple of years ago and lives in Colorado. But Malcolm Sr. and Malcolm Jr. were in South Africa teaching. And so Terry and I were in Shanghai. We had no manuals. We had no instruments at all. Were hung in customs, but we had 31 students. And Terry said, well, are you going to be the first instructor to cancel out? I said, nope. So I went to the hotel, and every day we Xeroxed. Took a manual. We always took a manual with us. I kept telling my NACE employees, I said, we got to leave some equipment over because it's going to happen one day, and it did. But anyway, I borrowed equipment, and we Xeroxed off every day the lessons that we had to teach and handed out to the students, and we just went through the whole deal like that. And so we made it through. But about Wednesday or Thursday, I looked down and the phone call was ringing, and it was Malcolm Sr. and Malcolm Jr. They said, how's class going? And I tell them, I said, this is the first time. And Malcolm Sr. said, we knew that it was going to happen. And I said, yeah, I said it would. I said, what are you doing? Oh, we're on a safari. I said, what? He said, right now I'm riding an elephant. And he said, but I want to call you. And he took sick. You're on a safari, and I'm over here dying with 31 students. And he just thought it was the funniest thing. And every time he said, remember the safari story? And I said, yeah, I wish you were over here with me. He said, I'm glad I'm on the elephant and you're over there trying to hide an elephant. Yeah, and so anyway, he loved telling that story, and it became really funny among everybody. But amazingly, our equipment got there at 10 o'clock at night, and we kept the students up all night and trained them, got them with the instruments, got them in and took the tests, and they all passed. But God, it was crazy. But, things happen. That's the thing. And when things did happen, Malcolm, he was always there to be sure everybody was happy and got the information they needed. And Stephanie, he loved you, boy. I'm telling you, girls, he did love you. he loved serving on that committee. He really did. He really liked that.
Yeah, he was the best. He really was. Yeah, I'll have to give you a hug the next time I see you, Phil, so we can have a little memory for Malcolm.
Well, and again, he was never old. That word was not in his vocabulary. Man, when I look, we had a conference, and I think actually when the last CEO left, and it was Malcolm's 90th birthday, and I got him up in front of everybody and introduced him and said, "It's hard to believe this guy is 107 years." He heard it. Said, "What does he say?" I said, "Yeah." I said, "You're gonna be 107." But he loved that kind of thing because I love teaching him, and he could handle it. Anyway, you guys, both y'all meant a lot to him. He did love CoatingsPro Magazine. That was part of his being.
Yeah, we loved having him.
And he made it to 92, so it wasn't that much of a joke. He wasn't that far away.
His birthday was January 9th or 11th. I have to look at one of those because we always celebrated it. And we called and talked, and after we hung up, we cried. I never cried with him on the phone. Well, maybe once. When he called me last time, told me to do his eulogy. But the family really was really kind and nice, and it was a very nice funeral, and it went well.
Phil, Stephanie, thank you so much for the time. This was wonderful. And for any of our listeners or viewers that want to learn more about Malcolm, again, we'll have links in the summary, or you can also go to coatingspromag.com or check out the November print issue and learn more about his great life and his distinguished service to our organization and to the industry. Phil Fouche, Stephanie Chizik, thank you both so much for taking the time to do this.
There's no time I'd rather spend than talking about Malcolm McNeil. He was, he had like 5 names. Everybody called him, went by McNeever, went by Dong Ping, Malcolm Sr., and everything. And he just, like he said, I don't care what you call me, just call me.
Oh, that's awesome. Thanks so much for your time, Ben.
Sure thing.
Thanks, Ben. Great job.
All right, that'll do it for this episode. Again, I'm Ben DuBose, and on behalf of the entire team at AMP Publications, we appreciate you all so much for reading and listening. And if you want more resources from us at AMP, just visit amp.org, ampp.org, and click on the media tab, and that'll have all the links you might need. Until next time, this is Where We Break. For Phil and Stephanie, and for Malcolm, I'm Ben. Thanks as always for listening, and please come back soon for more new AMP podcasts.